Welcome to the Pure Wellness Podcast, where we talk about what it takes to live a holistic lifestyle by making conscious, healthier choices. Our hope is that these discussions will inspire you to strengthen your daily practice to improve overall physical, mental, emotional, and social well-being. Pure Wellness Podcast provides information solely for educational purposes and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I'm your host, Johanna Altman, founder of One Body Medicine, avid health enthusiast, and mother of three. Join me and industry professionals as we explore human potential in the pursuit of pure wellness. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And today I have a special guest, Paulina Ferrari. And I'm excited to be talking about a topic that so many people are experiencing, especially in our clinic. We see patients come in with mold toxicity, and Paulina is going to tell us a little bit more about her approach to treating patients holistically. So, Paulina, I wanted to have you just give a background of what you do and how you got into functional diagnostic nutrition.
First, thank you for having me, Johanna. I love being here. Thank you for inviting me. It's such an honor. Yes, so Functional Diagnostic Nutrition is, or FDN for short.
Okay.
It's basically a way to help us use functional lab testing like stool, urine, saliva, hair, to get to the bottom of health issues so that we can figure out how to help people heal.
Okay.
And it's not like the doctors, where they give you a pill for the symptom. We don't treat symptoms. We treat the whole body, basically, to get people well. And that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, great. So I'm very curious how somebody gets into the field that you're in. So was there a personal story or?
Yes, for sure. So it started back in we built a custom home in the Bay Area in 2013, lived in it for only 4 years. And we had to evacuate, after we found out there was toxic mold, we had to leave and we abandoned our home. But in the meantime, go back 4 years when we first started living there, I had 3 kids and a husband and myself, and we all lived in that home. And one of my kids started having headaches.
Okay.
And we couldn't figure out what was causing the headaches. And it started once a week, twice a week, then every day, then migraines, and then at night. And he'd come to my bed at 2:00 in the morning, "Mom, I can't sleep. My head's pounding." And in the meantime, I had been trying and asking around, trying to figure out what's happening, who can help my son. I was just desperate. It was just awful to know your little ones are suffering. He wasn't the only one, but he was the canary in the coal mine. And so I took him to over 20 specialists.
Oh my goodness. So what specialist, where did you start?
Well, just the regular traditional people, the neurologists who wanted to give him anti-seizure medications and
insane.
Antidepressants to treat the headaches. And, maybe okay for symptoms for temporary, but people stay on these things for a long time. And it just wasn't good enough for me. And I just kept asking why. So inside me, it was that's how FDN works. We ask why. So I was already practicing
without
knowing that I'd end up becoming a practitioner. And so I ended up, that didn't work. We ended up, all kinds of people. He got shots in his neck. I mean, all kinds of things to try to help him. And we ended up taking him to the Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Clinic in Stanford. I mean, this is a big place but we got nowhere. They didn't help. They basically said, just rest. Just don't stress. Just rest. It's okay.
And how old was your son?
He was around 17 at the time. But he was 15 when we were in the home. And then at 17 is when we ended up having more chronic problems. But so I kept asking why, and it was horrible. In the meantime, my other son was developing chronic stomach problems, pain, and constipation, and they wanted to give him things like Miralax and stuff like that. And they never really dug deep to figure out what was going on. And then my other son had some depression, and two of my kids ended up dropping out of school.
Oh my goodness.
Husband ended up stopping work, and he's a medical doctor, and I ended up I was a stay-at-home mom. I used to be a high school math teacher, was a stay-at-home mom to raise my kids. And then I ended up with Hashimoto's at the end of it all. And and then one of my kids ended up with Crohn's disease. So it's like after a while, I pieced it all together, what was happening. But it wasn't until I kept asking, why are my kids getting sick? Why am I not well? What's going on? Why are we not feeling well? Why are we so tired? And then just asking and asking and asking questions, because this was a custom house. I mean, it was,
brand
beautiful. It looked pretty. It looked clean. It looked everything. But really there was toxic mold growing in different parts of the house, not just in one place. And, the reason I found out about it is because finally one friend that I knew of said to me, have you considered toxic mold as a source? And I said, gosh, no, I haven't. And that just sparked my,
interest.
I started looking into it.
So he was having the whole family eventually.
The whole family was having symptoms,
some type of mold.
I guess I'm going back in my story, but okay. So, we did end up seeing doctors also in the meantime, not, before finding out about the mold, we were like figuring out what to do. We ended up seeing, some doctors who were, mold doctors,
mold specialist
doctors. They were certified under the Ritchie Shoemaker protocol and everything. Ritchie Shoemaker is a doctor who discovered the mold genes, basically. And
now, what are the mold genes? If you could tell us a little bit more.
So there's an array of genes, and there's actually some mold genes. There's a Lyme gene, and then there's the multi to see if you have both. And they ran a whole bunch of those tests on us, their blood tests. And it turns out one of the doctors actually misdiagnosed my husband and told him that he didn't have this issue. And so, here was my husband going into our house. This was after we found out it was moldy, and after we had, tried to move our things out. He was going in there trying to clean everything up. And in the meantime, he was actually getting sicker and sicker and sicker because he did have one of the mold genes. And he was misdiagnosed.
What does the mold gene, how does that affect, I guess, that person who has a mold gene different than somebody who's not a carrier of that gene?
So mold is going to affect everybody, whether you have the mold gene or not. It's just that if you have the mold gene, that makes you more susceptible to becoming more sick faster.
Understand.
And most people who have this mold gene, characteristically, we don't detox very well. Some of us might have a mutation in the MTHFR gene or some other SNPs going on. Like I know one of my kids and I, we have the exact same thing. And so we constantly work on detoxification and drainage and things like that. But it was interesting because going back, we did see Dr. Ritchie Shoemaker in person, and he realized, he's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that your husband was misdiagnosed. This is not okay. But we just went through so many of these types of situations where we were just so disappointed. It was just awful.
Well, that's the story with traditional medicine. I've interviewed a handful of people, and, I think holistic medicine and the path that you've gone through is so important because many more people are becoming their own health advocate, which is really encouraging.
Yes. Right after we realized that there was I called around and found that there was this man named John Banta, who is like the father of house biohacks, basically. He came to our home and inspected, and he had us tear out little bits and pieces of places of the home. But more importantly, we realized that my son, who was the canary in the coal mine, he was using a shower that every time he turned the knob, the water behind the tile, there was water that was going behind the tile down. So we never saw the leak. It was going behind the tile and it trickled down. This was on the second floor, and it trickled down to the first floor in the laundry room, which, when we took things apart, we realized everything was full of toxic mold.
And what's scary about that is there was no visual signs that there was actually black mold.
Right.
If we're lucky, if people that have homes that do have mold, if we're lucky, then we'll be able to see evidence of that and the black spores on the drywall. But what you experienced was very different.
Yeah. And then when we had the professionals come and take a look at our home, they noticed inside my master bathroom in one of the baseboards, they looked at a little spot and they said, "Do you mind if we open that up? We'll do containment." And that's the right way to do it. You have to use containment, and they wear their Tyvek suits and everything. They went in there and they opened up a little bit and they're like, "Yes, we suspect there's a little something going on." It was just, I looked at it and I said, "No, that looks fine." Mm-hmm. And they're like, "No, I don't think so." So they opened it up a little bit, and sure enough, and it was black mold.
That's crazy.
And they took off the baseboard, then the tub came out in the shower, and it was like this huge piece, It was amazing. And in different parts of the home, same exact thing.
So I'm sure there was actually a statistic that I read that 45 million buildings in the U.S. have unhealthy levels of mold. And also that 21% of asthma cases are related to mold toxicity, and they go undiagnosed. So one of the things I wanted to ask you is, in treating your patients, what are common symptoms that they're having that are manifesting as maybe other misdiagnosed diseases, maybe like MS or things like that? Respiratory.
Yeah. Well, definitely. There's definitely so many. So I always say, what does mold not do? What does it not do? Because it basically, it affects every cell, tissue, organ in the body. You get headaches, you get fatigue, you get, stomach problems, digestion, you get hair loss. There's everything. And so people then, they just treat the symptoms by going to their traditional doctor. They get their pill. They might get better for a little while, but it doesn't really address the whole problem, the issue from the root. So the problem continues, and then that medication that they're taking is going to create more symptoms
or side effects.
For which and then they go get more pills for those side effects, and on and on. And so then people come to me after years of being in dysfunction, and, depending on how long they've been unwell, it could take a bit of time to get them better. I find children are more easily to help reverse with their symptoms because they've been, I guess, sicker for less amount of time. But if somebody who's a senior citizen, they're just finding out that they, it's because of this mold that is colonized in my body, and we can find that out through these tests that I run, then we can begin getting it out of their body.
So what are these tests? So I'm a patient that comes to see you because I am having all of these symptoms that are relatable to maybe other undiagnosed diseases. And my doctor is telling me I'm fine. But now, after years of knowing I'm not feeling well, and I come to you as a patient, walk me through the steps of the type of testing that you would recommend. I don't know if there would be supplements, nutrition associated with that. So give me an overview of what that looks like.
So for sure, people will come to me, and I always start with blood, because I find I do a comprehensive blood work where people will go to LabCorp or a different lab that's close to their home, and I'm very picky with what I want them to do. Often if we just use what they have from their doctors, it's just not enough, because I'll do a full thyroid panel, full iron panel, and then vitamin D is very important. So many people are deficient in vitamin D. And so I'll do that, and we'll start with that. And that'll give me clues as to, do they have viral infections, bacterial infections? Maybe even, if certain things are elevated, do they have possible mold and fungal infections, parasites? It'll all show up in the blood, but it doesn't give us the specifics. That's when it allows me to say, all right, now let's dig deeper with the stool and the urine. But the blood is still important because it helps me with diet. It helps me, and the urine also. It helps me come up with a really great specific diet for my people.
Now, I'm sorry, is that testing, what do they call it? It's a food allergy test. Is that what you're doing? Because we just discussed blood, but when you're mentioning nutrition, is there a separate type of testing for that?
So there is a food sensitivity test that's specific that I like to use for my people who tend to be autoimmune people. And even if you're not autoimmune, it's excellent because it will show if these common foods that people think are healthy are actually triggering an immune response in the body that people aren't necessarily aware of or even like noticing. Yeah. Like, for instance, I have Hashimoto's. I can have a piece of bread, not that I will, but I'm sure nothing will happen because I've done all the work to be super healthy. But so that's what I mean. Like, you'll eat something and people will think, oh, well, I don't have a stomach problem. Look, I can have a sandwich and I'm not bloated. I don't have constipation. But you don't know what's happening inside. There's an immune response that's happening, and so these tests will specifically show us what's happening and to what level, and it'll break down into the peptides of the specific food of what's happening. Like one of my clients, I had started her with no eggs, and she was oh my gosh, I'm going to miss my eggs. I miss my eggs. So it got to the point where she got feeling so good after working with me. She did an egg test to see for not allergy, but sensitivity that I use specifically with a certain lab that I love. And and she was not able to have eggs. And so it's good to know these things because, it doesn't mean that you can't have them forever. But I mean, eventually as the body heals, sometimes you can reintroduce these foods and be okay.
Okay, that's good. Which, by the way, my husband did a food sensitivity test a few years ago. And one of his favorite fruits, well, it's a fruit because tomatoes have seeds, right? Which is odd to me. He loved to eat tomatoes whole. And one of his food sensitivity tests, the marker said that it was creating inflammation in his body. And he had no awareness, no bloating, no acid reflux, no symptoms. So
it's the nightshade. So that's common sometimes with people who have, possible tendencies towards autoimmune. It depends. But yeah, going back to the testing, the tests that I do are mostly, I have a package that I absolutely adore that can apply to any human being because we live in such a toxic soup these days with, being hit with over 80,000 toxins a day just by breathing.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So I love to look at stool and urine tests because when people are exposed to mold, and if there is mold, there's mold in 1 out of every 2 buildings now, and with all the issues that we have and all the toxins that we have to face every day in our bodies, we're not meant to detox those from the beginning of time, right? And now we have to detox them now. I like to use stool tests and urine tests to figure out what's going on with the body. And just by using those 2 tests, those 2 types of tests, we can really figure out, what is the microbiome showing? Does the person have parasites? And often parasites don't even show up in the stool because it's not always there. Sometimes the parasites can be, the nasal cavity or in the brain. I know.
No,
I know.
Don't now I'm going to have nightmares over this. So what, okay, let's talk about that because I'm very interested. So the stool test, is something you look at to observe the gut microbiome, correct?
Right.
And then what are the urine tests telling us? What are you looking for?
The urine test will tell us what mold or mycotoxin the person has been exposed to. And then it also tells us, and a separate urine test from a different company will tell us, the organic acids test will tell us if there's mold colonized in the body, meaning the person has become the moldy building and the mold is inside you, and it'll show up in the markers and it'll be flagged in high in certain markers. And some of those markers will tell us if they are, most of them are from the environment, from water damaged homes. So then we know, okay, it's time to have the person run some either at-home mold tests that they can do, or they can hire a professional to test their home. But a lot of times their homes could be clean and it's just inside them. And so we work on getting rid of the mold that's inside them.
And then I know we're not really talking about parasites, but just one quick question about that. When a patient comes and you've done blood work or stool or urine and realize that they have parasites, what is the treatment for that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's not like a doctor will give a patient a pill to get rid of the parasites. I take on a little bit of a different approach. I make sure not all doctors are like that, right? But most. But I do like drainage and detoxification, really prepare the body, and also through deep nutrition, just because we want that body as resilient as possible. Because when we start eradicating the bad bugs, we want the person not to herx so much or not to have bad reactions like nausea and headache or fatigue or something like that. So I really go through a lot of, I go out of my way to really prepare their body. And it's interesting. One of my kids, when he was going through a parasite thing with his doctor and he was done, I wasn't convinced that he was done. So I gave him my parasites. This was when I was still kind of going through my studies and everything. And he started it and I hadn't told him what I gave him. I just gave it to him and he took it. Really good kids. I love my kids. And so he took it.
Well, they got to do what mama says.
That's right. That's right. So he took it and
was this a supplement?
And this was a supplement. Yeah. It's whole herbs, just real natural stuff, gentle. And he took just one. And that afternoon or that late afternoon, he yelled at me from way across we have a very long house. He's like, Mom! I'm like, what is it? And he's like, what's happening? He's like, oh, my Crohn's is getting worse. And then he started saying, I have this green thing that came out of me. And he's like, I have to pull it out.
My God, I would die.
I was laughing so hard. And I said, sweetheart, I didn't tell you, by the way, but I gave you a little supplement to help you kind of finish what we started. And he's like, well, why didn't you tell me? I said, well, because I wasn't sure you would actually agree to take it.
Oh my God.
So after that, he's like, give me more. I want to. So he took it and it lasted like a few more months because, we've taken our time with all this. And
so I'm very interested in somebody, again, going back to mold, your treatment plan. How long does that last? Is it 3 months, 6 months? And I know it's going to depend on the severity. Yeah. But do you retest after a certain amount of time?
100%. Okay. It's so important to retest. And in fact, once I have a 6-month program, it's not to say that everybody's going to be fine after 6 months because but it gets everybody started. And I teach basically how to live in this how to navigate through this toxic world so that people can thrive. Okay. That's basically what I do. So I can work with basically anyone. You don't have to be, because I teach people what to do in order to prevent disease and be as healthy as possible. So after the 6 months, they just kind of either continue what they're doing, and because we talk about maintenance, or they enroll in my maintenance program where they get a chance to retest every year if they want. Or they can retest as much as they want.
I think that's probably a good way to stay ahead and proactive.
Yeah, for sure. Like I test my kids once a year. We do a stool test once a year to make sure we're on the right track. If something new pops up, we address it. Same thing with urine. And those are my go-tos. Honestly, they're the best. And they really help us stay on it. You know?
That's amazing.
Yeah. And we take binders every single day. Binders every single day.
What's a binder?
A binder is a substance that you take on an empty stomach that will grab onto a toxin.
I see. So it's just it's a supplement, or is that
it's
an
a
herb?
supplement. Everything is just based on herbs, based on different earth compounds that will just bind things. So there's things for heavy metals, because when we're exposed to mold, we often have parasites, we often have heavy metals, we often have candida, which is a huge thing, or candida. Some people say candida.
Yeah.
But a yeast is a really...
So that's all related, because I do know a lot of women, particularly, that have candida overgrowth.
100%. And they get recurrent UTIs, they have bad breath, they have white tongues, they have, itchy skin, they get itchy scalps, and they're like, oh, I don't know why. We can topical treat with coconut oil because it's an antifungal, antimicrobial, but it's not going to, really. And by the way, diet is not going to fix it. Like, we can have like the perfect diet, not even eat tomatoes because it's it's like you were mentioning, because it's, full of phytates and anti-nutrients and stuff like that. But it's also got, really good things in it too. But what I mean is, even if we have the most perfect diet, the perfect diet will not fix us. We won't be able to, we can't, that's not going to address our parasites or address our candida or our H. pylori or our viral infections. It's not going to get rid of our mold. It's not going to get rid of our heavy metals. The perfect diet is not going to do that, but we need a good foundation. In fact, I had one lady who, was a pescatarian because she was so proud of herself. She's like, oh, I don't eat red meat. I don't even eat chicken. I eat, I'm like, that's good. Awesome. Good for you, But we ran her blood and she had huge levels of histamine. And she came to me because she wasn't feeling well, right? And I said, well, just by looking at her blood work, I already knew that the fish she was eating was hurting her tremendously.
Do you think she was eating fish high in mercury? Possibly.
100%. And it's also high in histamine. So she had to, when I told her, and she felt better after she started eating other sources of protein, she was like, oh my goodness. And I thought I was eating, and I was getting it fresh right from my local, because she lived in Florida,
And it's organic.
And all these, it's wild caught and all this. So, So, and it's different for everybody. And some people can have fish.
It just depends. Everybody's independent and different, and we need to do that test.
Yeah. And then the urine test that I use, one of them will also tell me if a person is having a hard time with high oxalate foods. So
now, what is a high oxalate food?
High oxalate foods are things like beets that are healthy for us, right? Let's see, some other foods that are high in oxalate. Beets, some asparagus, some spinach, some kale, just certain things. I have a whole list that I give to my clients when I see this. And a lot of it sometimes stems from having a yeast overgrowth in the body, because that's what it spits out. It gives off those toxins. And then we end up getting problems with kidney stones and things like that. So people who have those tendencies have to watch their diet. And but it's interesting, because if you see this on the test in advance, you can kind of prevent these problems for the future.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Like if I had run some of these tests on myself, and if I had seen that I was having H. pylori, which is a contributor to Hashimoto's, wow, what if I had gotten rid of the H. pylori? Maybe I would never have gotten, if I had addressed the mold before it got too far along, maybe I would have never gotten the Hashimoto's diagnosis. So these tests are very preventative. And that's what functional diagnostic nutrition does, is we look to prevent and maybe even, I can't say reverse, but I mean, I kind of do that, right?
Well, it's possible. It's possible.
Yeah, for sure. So it's really exciting work.
Yeah, all of this is very new to me. It's very exciting. And I'm still stuck on the mold toxicity causing parasites. Like, that kind of freaks me out a little bit.
Yeah. So mold just kind of weakens the immune system to the point where it changes our terrain. Our terrain becomes like so weak. Like, we get low stomach acid. We can't absorb our nutrients anymore. Because now what's happened is that our terrain has become a place where these bad bugs can thrive.
Yeah.
And they don't often travel alone. they travel in pairs,
God.
like candida and mold hookup and parasites. And,
wow.
H. pylori is a huge problem, is what I find. Almost every single person that has come to me has had a problem with H. pylori. It's a stomach infection where over 50% of the population has this problem, and it could be people can be asymptomatic. So what are the symptoms though? It could be pretty much anything. It could be acne, it could be headache, it could be nausea, especially for teenagers. I find that they don't have appetites in the morning. They don't want to eat until like 1 or 2 o'clock, in the afternoon.
Which is not normal for a young child.
And so, but then those are clues. And then you look at, and then you get their stool tests, and then you say, well, this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about this is that it's super contagious. So if you kiss someone with this H. pylori infection, you can get it. And also if you share, a food with someone, or if you, share a water bottle, that's how you get this infection. And I actually have a client right now. He came to me because he just wanted to sleep better. That was his main complaint. And I ran the stool test along with a bunch of other tests, but the stool test came back and I said, oh my goodness, look at this. Not only H. pylori in high amounts, but 3 virulence factors, which are, and all this is because of mold, right? And by the way, people go to their doctor and they address the H. pylori with 3 antibiotics plus a proton pump inhibitor, which lowers your stomach acid even more, making things even worse in the long run, right? And then only for it to come back. What's nice is that I also address the mold piece to not allow these bugs to come back.
So,
right?
So all of these other things are stemming from mold.
Exactly.
And I didn't know that.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mold is Top Gun. I call it it's the umbrella over everything else. And I say when you go trying to address something and have trouble addressing it and it keeps coming back, like these stubborn UTIs, they keep coming back. People keep going and doing their over-the-counter stuff, right?
People.
Comes back, look upstream. Maybe there's mold that you have. Maybe there's some in your home. Maybe you're living in it, or maybe it's just colonized inside you and you're not living in it. Maybe it's in your car. Maybe it's at your school. Maybe it's in your church. So it's just, and there's things you can do to test your home yourself to see, if you're being exposed. Mm-hmm. So,
wow, that's a lot.
Anyway,
that's a lot. Well, I don't have any more questions. And I've learned so much from our conversation today. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I would like to say that for anybody who is living in a moldy building right now and they're not sure what to do, I would have liked having this information myself. So I created an ebook on my website for people to download and get information so then they can know what to do right away.
What is that website where they can find your ebook?
It's paulinaferrari.com, my name. Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. So I'm sure I'm even going to go and look into that and do more reading. Thank you so much for joining us.
This was fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. This podcast is sponsored and brought to you by One Body Medicine. You can learn more by visiting onebodymedicine.com. That's the number 1, bodymedicine.com. You can also follow the show on social media under the handle Pure Wellness Pod. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.